Part 2, how my friend scheduled her wedding on my family's death anniversary. I tried to compromise with Amy and tell her that I'd attend my family's graves after her wedding. She said she wanted my support for the entire day and dedicated towards her, but she'd think about my offer. She was there for me when they passed and I'm torn, but I refused to miss going to their graves. I called my other friends to let them know what Amy asked of me. They were livid for me as they had no idea what Amy was planning for the wedding. We arranged a Zoom call and discussed why she was being so insensitive towards me. It started off calm, then Amy just blew up. At first, she tried to explain that having a wedding on the same day would turn a negative situation into a positive one. When she realized it wasn't convincing enough, it felt as though a mask had fallen from her face and she started yelling and insulting me. She said she's tired of having to play the supportive friend role and that it's been 7 years, so I should just get over it by now or go join my family in the ground. My friends lost their anger and called her every name in the book. It hurt to have lost another person in my life, but in a sense, she never really was a good friend. None of her friends are going to the wedding now and have all blocked her on social media. My friends offered to go visit my family's grave with me and I accepted. We're planning to also make a scrapbook with my family's pictures in it. For once, I'm actually looking forward to this day. Crime Fanatic Friday, The Boy in the Box. The year was 1957 and it was a cold and dewy morning in Philadelphia. A man was poking around a portion of road that was used as a dumping ground for garbage. He poked something that he originally thought was a doll packed away in a bassinet box. He was so convinced it was a doll that he didn't call the police. However, the next day, a news report broadcasted a missing 4-year-old girl. This is when he questioned himself about the doll he saw and decided to call it in. When investigators arrived at the scene, they found wrapped in a flannel blanket was the nude, badly injured body of a little boy. Police estimated the boy to be between 4 to 6 years old with a full set of baby teeth. His cause of death was severe trauma to the head, but his body showed signs of years of abuse. He was malnourished, covered in bruises, had a scar under his chin, and surgical scars on his ankle and groin. The police were confident that this case would be solved quickly. However, days turned into weeks and no one came forward to identify the body. Hundreds of recruits scoured the woods looking for any clues. The paper distributed over 200,000 flyers. The child was unidentified for years to come. That is until 1998, when a segment of America's Most Wanted led to a spike in interest in the case. His body was exhumed for a DNA sample. Part 2, I have feelings for my coworker, but I'm engaged. I didn't tell my fiance about Jason because I felt like this was only happening because I was never home. I felt like hardly seeing him had to be the root cause of this mess. I talked to him about making more of an effort to see each other despite my crazy schedule. This worked for a little while, but I still had feelings I couldn't deny for Jason despite trying to suppress them. I even told Jason that we had to keep things strictly professional from now on, to which he agreed. However, this agreement didn't last long. Jason and I were assigned to work in the same area for the next month. One night when we were on break together, he started telling me how much he missed talking to me like we used to. One thing led to another, and we ended up making out in the break room. This was the first time it actually got physical between us, but sadly it wasn't the last. I'm ashamed to say it happened a few more times. At this point, I knew this couldn't keep going on, so I made the decision to break up with my fiance. I quickly found out that this was the wrong choice. Shortly after, I found out that Jason was sleeping with another girl at work. I was crushed and completely cut him off. I realized I made a mistake and tried to reach out to my fiance, but it was too late. I got distracted by what could have been and lost track of something great that I already had. I still regret it to this day. Crime Fanatic Friday, the serial killer who fed his victims to pigs. In 2002, police raided a pig farm owned by Robert Pickton to execute a search warrant for illegal firearms. However, what they uncovered led to a horrifying investigation that would cost the Canadian government $70 million. In the 80s and 90s, there was a spike in missing women. These women were all in high-risk positions such as sex workers, runaways, addicts, and women suffering from mental health illnesses. Pickton honed in on these vulnerable women by luring them to his farm with promises of money, drugs, and shelter. He would perform sexual acts with them and then talk them into letting him handcuff them. Once they were bound, he would ruthlessly torture them and murder them. In 1997, Pickton led a woman to his property and attempted to handcuff her. When she resisted, he became violent and stabbed her in the stomach. She managed to wrestle the knife away from him and stabbed him back, then ran to the road where she flagged down an oncoming vehicle. They both arrived at the same hospital for treatment, which is where he was later arrested. He was charged with attempted murder, assault, and forcible confinement. However, the charges were eventually dropped because the woman was an addict and not considered a competent witness. After this incident, women kept going missing and it would be another 5 years before police would uncover the chilling truth. Crime Fanatic Friday Part 2, the serial killer who fed his victims to pigs. Rumors swirled within the sex worker community that there was an active serial killer long before investigations took place. In 1999, the police had another opportunity to arrest Robert Pickton when a sex worker and addict told police she had seen a woman's body hanging in Pickton's slaughterhouse. However, when questioned by police, she denied the story. She later confessed that it was true, but she lied due to being dependent on Pickton for money. Despite Pickton consenting to a police search, no investigation was completed. This led to him becoming more confident with killing and getting sloppy when hiding any potential evidence. A worker on Pickton's farm informed police that several women's IDs were seen on the property. However, they told him that an eyewitness or physical evidence was needed. In 2002, another employee reported personally seeing illegal firearms on the property. That's when they were able to execute a search warrant. A massive investigation was done and they uncovered multiple missing women's belongings. They never found complete bodies, only fragments such as teeth, hair, or small bone pieces. Police believe that Pickton would murder, dismember, and feed his victims through a meat grinder before discarding their remains into pig pens. In 2007, Pickton was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Storytime about how I was manipulated by a nurse in a psych ward. When I was 19 years old, I was admitted to a psychiatric ward for women for attempting to unalive myself. Most of the other women there were also there for this reason and for personality disorders. We were long-term patients who were held there against our will for our own safety. Me and some of the other women had our favorite staff members, one of which was a male nurse. He was 35 years old, seemed nice, always had our backs, and would often talk about his son in personal life. This made us all feel comfortable with him. Some days, a group of us would be allowed to go off the premises with a staff member and hang around the town for 2 hours. However, some things weren't allowed, such as using the phone while we were out in case a phone call upset us, or mood-altering drinks such as energy drinks or alcohol. Since our freedom was restricted most of the time, we'd always ask for him to be the one who took us. He would let us buy drinks and go off on our own. He would also let us use a phone to make calls to our family, buy us food and cigarettes. He even drove back the long way so we wouldn't have to be back so soon. At the time, we didn't really know why he would be so nice and lenient because he could lose his job letting us do those things. However, one day out of the blue, he was suspended, and this is when we found out what was really going on. Part 2 of how I was manipulated by a nurse in a psych ward. When he was suspended, we were all confused. It turns out that he was getting sexual favors from some of the women in exchange for giving us more freedom. Some of the women were so unwell that they didn't know what he was doing was wrong. We were all sectioned off and they were extremely strict with us since we didn't have the capacity to make rational decisions. This gave them power over us. After all, we were in a place that was meant to keep us safe. The only reason it got out is because one day, another staff member was searching a patient's room and found a phone. Once confronted, the patient admitted how they received the phone and what they had to do for it. He was manipulating us so that in return for our freedom, we would have to do something for him. Some of us were shocked because he always talked about his son who was 5 years old telling us about their weekends. He didn't seem like a monster. Luckily, it never happened to me, but it happened to the friends I made there. After he was suspended, some of the women had to take it to court. It was obviously traumatic as they were already there for serious mental health issues. Some of the girls had to have additional therapy for it as well since it was essentially assault. We never found out what happened to him or if he went to prison. Sadly, one of the girls I know is still very traumatized by it. This is how a phone call from my mom saved my life. When I was 15, I started working weekends at a skate park over the summer and I was the only female employee there. They'd host a ton of events and rock shows. These events were extremely fun and all my friends would hang out there for a good time, so we got to know the owners pretty well. The two guys who owned the shop were in their 40s, overweight and balding. Their names were Doug and Mark. Doug was married with kids, so he was always more serious about the business and rarely joked around. However, Mark was a single dude who was outgoing and silly. He was always joking around and pretty chill, so we always had a fun time with him around. There were a few red flags that I ignored, such as how Mark came up to me at one of the events and picked me up, tickling me and spinning me around. I awkwardly laughed it off, but I was creeped out. Another time, I noticed him giving me flirty looks and sticking his tongue out at me. It felt inappropriate, but I shrugged it off thinking it was all in good fun. That was until one day when the fun stopped. Mark called me to the back room. Doug was on a phone call in the front, and when I got to the back room, Mark picked me up and set me on a washing machine. This is when he tells me he wants to kiss me. I automatically shut him down. He then tries to persuade me to lift up my shirt for him. Again, I tell him no and hop down, proceeding to walk towards the front, thinking that was it. I had no idea how much danger I was really in. Part 2 of how a phone call from my mom saved my life. Doug opened the door and asked what we were doing, followed by asking if Mark showed me their butterfly collection. I awkwardly said no and walked out. Around 5 o'clock, Doug asked me to go with Mark to run some errands. All I could think about is how awkward the ride was going to be as we hadn't talked since the incident. Mark drove us to the other side of town to my high school. We pull in the back parking lot on a Saturday. I asked what we were doing there and he said he was scouting for a new area for a skate park behind the school. He gets out of the car and motioned me to go with him. Then he leads me to an area with dense forest-like woods. He urges me to go with him into the woods, telling me to take his hand to show me the spot. At this point, I'm panicking and debating on making a run for it. That's when my cell phone rings and I quickly answer it. It was my mom and she asked if she could come pick me up early to go to dinner. With a sense of urgency, I tell her, yes, I'm at the high school, come get me now. I think she heard the fear in my voice because she made it there in 5 minutes. I told Mark my mom was on the way and I had to go, and he seemed pissed. He walked with me to the front and didn't say bye. My mom picked me up, asking if I was okay. I was in shock, but said yes. I went straight home and quit that very day. I'm 100% convinced that he was planning to do something terrible to me in those woods. Storytime about how a guy I hooked up with posted me on an explicit website. In the summer of 2018, I was a senior in high school and worked at a bike rental shop. I was always kind to the customers, but also careful not to be too friendly. One day, it was a few minutes before closing when this group of college guys came into the shop to rent out some bikes for the week. I gladly helped them with the rental and got all the bikes ready. As I was sizing them up and chatting, all the guys were being really friendly and telling me about all their fun plans. I finished getting their bikes ready, and before they left, they asked me for my Snapchat. I never gave out my personal information to customers, but I let it slide because these guys were so fun. I started talking to them on Snap over the next few days, and one of them caught my eye. His name was Tom, and we just clicked. He was easy to talk to, and he would even come by the shop to say hi every now and then. We were flirting with each other a lot, and he finally asked me to hang out with him. During our first hangout, he invited me back to the rental house where all of them were staying for the week. I spent the night and we hooked up. The next morning I left, and throughout the week we kept messaging each other like normal. Things seemed to be going great until I woke up one morning